When I'm in Nevis or planning a trip to the Queen's Island, I don't hesitate to visit the official website of the Nevis Disaster Management Department to assure a safe and healthy stay. Contact 1-869-469-1423 or email info@ndmd.kn. You can check out the website at www.ndmd.kn or the Facebook page Nevis Outlet and ndmd.kn.
I'd like to welcome you to Charlotte Baptist Church. Happy that you are here. We are here in collaboration with the Nevis Disaster Management Department as they have launched a 12-month multi-hazard campaign. And as part of this campaign, Charlotte Baptist Church has partnered with them and are happy to be able to lead on the awareness of the hazard of excessive heat. And so, but before we begin, we'll stand and have a word of opening prayer, and then we'll go from there. Heavenly Father, we thank you once again for your goodness. Thank you for your blessings and your mercy, your grace upon our lives. Lord, we thank you for the opportunity to be alive, and we don't take that for granted, and we ask for your blessings tonight as information is shared and disseminated that will help us, dear Lord, cope with realities of our day. May you bless in a special way. May you be with each speaker and each presenter, that they'll give them clarity of thought and freedom of speech. And may everything that's said and done bring honor and glory to your name. We thank you for your goodness, and we ask for your continued blessings and guidance. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. As I indicated, Charlotte Baptist Church has partnered with the Disaster Management Department to be able to bring awareness to this issue of excessive heat. And I'm sure all of us would agree that we are living in a time that, from our own senses, appears to be hotter than in times past. And I know that tonight much pertinent information will be shared as to how we can deal and cope with this new reality in which we face. And so I'm going to ask, without any further ado, for Jack Gumba, who's a Senior Communications Officer at the Disaster Management Department and also the Acting Deputy Director, to come, and he'll be chairing and moderating this panel discussion. He'll introduce the panelists, and you welcome him as he comes.
It is worth noting that the faith-based multi-hazard campaign is one out of many strategies by the Nevis Disaster Management Office. We would have started with the school base, which involved the primary schools. And now we are on with faith-based, involving the churches. From this, it's going to move further with businesses and also government offices. When we look at hazards and their occurrences in the past 30 years, there have been an increase. Hurricane, earthquake, tsunami, etc. And the damages that have occurred are beyond human controls at times. We've lost lives, properties, etc. What has been the concern is, can we stop this from happening? Certainly not. If we know we can't stop, what then should we do? The better thing is to mitigate, reduce the impact of these hazards. And this has become the strategy we are using. Part of it is awareness, letting persons know what to do before, during, and after. The approach we are using is participatory. We get our audiences to play the role of our messengers. Instead of talking to you, we got you being the one transmitting our messages. So we've assigned churches under the multi-hazard faith-based campaign to play the role of disseminating the messages. In the month of January, the Wesleyan Holiness Church is in charge of earthquake. The 7 days, they handle tsunami. In the month of March, the month of May, we have the Eden Brown Church handling drought. The month of June, we had hurricane, which was handled by the Methodist Church. And Shiloh Baptist now is handling excessive heat. The panelists are going to give us an in-depth of it. The temperature of Nevis today is quite different from how it was 14 years ago. Everybody can testify of that excessive heat. But what do we do before it becomes catastrophic? Of course, we have persons who are going to assist us to know this.
We're dying. It's hot.
My eyebrows are sweating. It's tough.
It's very hot, can barely walk.
What do we do to combat the excessive heat?
Avoid dark colors because they absorb the sun's rays.
Drink lots of water.
Slow down, stay indoors, and avoid strenuous exercise during the hottest part of the day.
Keep in cool areas as much as possible to avoid heat stroke.
Use a buddy system when working in excessive heat, and take frequent breaks if you must work outdoors.
Ensure to hydrate livestock and water crops regularly.
Thank you, Shiloh Baptist, for having us here. The concept of excessive heat might seem somewhat foreign, and persons may say, why are we focusing on excessive heat? And I'm happy that the NDMD here in Nevis has taken the opportunity to really start to look at and discuss excessive heat. Whenever we're talking about excessive heat, we are speaking about abnormally high temperatures. Temperatures that is higher than normal. And I think almost everyone here can testify that the place has been excessively warm. Not only in the daytime, but more so, you're feeling it in the nighttime when you're expecting it to be much, much cooler. And there are several impacts that I'm going to try to touch on. When you're looking at excessive heat, I'm going to look at it in terms of the potential impacts on the human body, as well as from an agricultural sector as well. And then we will try to tie it in terms of what are some of the things that we need to do to minimize some of these potential impacts. Whenever we're looking at excessive heat is very discomforting, especially for us human beings. And most persons would recognize whenever we are excessively hot, by human nature, we would either fan, we would try to go to a cooler place, or we try to drink more water, more fluids, and so forth. And that is just a natural response. And it is important that persons recognize that when you have these excessive heat conditions, you have to find some way to cool down your body temperature. And it so be that you may have to go inside a cooler room, or as I said, you may have to increase the amount of water you drink. And when we say drink water, too often persons wait until they are dehydrated. And most persons only recognize that they are dehydrated when they say, oh my gosh, I'm thirsty, my lip cracking up and so forth. That is when it's extreme. What we always encourage persons to do is, even from Red Cross, keep hydrating your body, especially once you know that the temperatures are excessively warm as it is right now. Keep drinking water. And when we say drink water, we don't mean gulping it. Just sip it. Sip water periodically, and that will help with rehydrating the body cells. At the same time, when you now look at it from a agricultural point of view, because it is always easy for us as humans to recognize that we are heat stressed. But then persons may say, how can we recognize in terms of from animal point of view? I'm not an expert, mind you. I'm not an expert in terms of agriculture, but I know a bit because I would have done agrometeorology. And one of the indications that you would recognize in terms of animals, whenever animal is feeling excessively warm, always want to move towards water, even if it's just wet mud, because it's trying to cool down its body temperature as much as possible. And we as humans, we have to assist the animals in that venture by providing excessive water, additional water source for them to either drink or even cheek coverage. Because you recognize, if we follow the news carefully, in Brazil, especially for the Amazon, we would have heard the news about a lot of farmers who would have been clearing lands because they're going into cattle breeding and so forth. But it's a double-edged sword. Because what's going to happen, they're going to cut down most of the trees, they're going to get that, yes, they're going to get the cattle. However, whenever the place gets excessively warm, which will happen because the climate is changing and the climatology has indicated that we're going to be seeing warmer temperatures. So based on what we have seen for the year, every single month this year has been the warmest month in history. When I say that, January was the warmest January ever, February was the warmest February ever, July was the warmest. And we are on par that August will be the warmest August ever in record. So we have to take stock of these things, and we have to take actions to, as Jack would have indicated, we have to mitigate in terms of how can we minimize the impact on us as humans as well as the agricultural livestock. Also from an agricultural point of view, persons need to recognize plants can move, unfortunately. So because the place is getting excessively warm, we have to be strategic in terms of how are we going to water our crops to ensure that they do not go through wilting, because the more your crop wilts, the less you're going to have in terms of production and produce. And what we as agrometeorologists or meteorologists always encourage farmers to do is, if you're going to water your crops, you either do it early in the morning when it is relatively cooler, or you do it late at evening when it's supposed to be relatively cool. Try to avoid watering your plants during the hot sun, because you're just wasting your water basically. And also, you now have to find ways, instead of you just putting on your tap or your sprinkler, find ways to get the water directly or as close as possible to your root system. The closer you have, because that's all the plant needs. The plant don't need water all around it in terms of the environment. It just needs water close to its root network for it to absorb it, for it to survive during the excessive heat.
I join with Jack and the disaster management as usual. Red Cross is very happy to partner as key stakeholders in disaster preparedness in all its aspects. And when Jack contacted us to have a discussion on heat wave, heat exhaustion, excessive heat, we've worked with disaster, and so I was aware of all the others. And interestingly, I had not thought that heat wave was on the discussion for this year. And it's very important, and Jack has asked me to wear the double hat of Red Cross and of medic as a nurse. So I'll be speaking in both capacities. Heat waves, extreme heat, etc., is a natural disaster, and it is a hazard. although it isn't as spectacular as the hurricanes and the earthquakes, etc., the impact can be equally devastating and even more so to human health if it goes unrecognized and untreated. The public perception is, and it's a very common statement we hear, is that the place is always hot. We are accustomed to heat. So when we think of heat wave, very often we think of it as a foreign thing of persons who are exposed to extreme heat in climates that have several temperatures, but we think of ourselves as we are in the tropics, and so it's hot. But as Elmo just indicated, the heat is increasing, the Earth's temperature is increasing, and the scientists have indicated that it's due to climate change, and that the heat will continue to increase. And so it's very important for the public to recognize that extreme heat is a health hazard and that we need to do everything within our capacity to reduce its impact on the human being. Now, what can we do to reduce the impact of extreme heat? Now, the human body, our bodies are intended to function within what we call an equilibrium, meaning that we are expected, the body's temperature runs within a range. And whenever it goes above that or below that, it impacts our physiological or normal state. And so that's where we feel things like increased thirst. So thirst is a normal indicator we need to drink water. But that's where we'd feel the need for more water. Heat on our skin, we'd feel hot. And some persons will actually go on to become dehydrated, experience heat exhaustion, and actually encounter a heat stroke. Now, by the time it gets to those points, by then it's a bit far, especially if it reaches heat exhaustion and then onto heat stroke. So the important thing, the key point, and that is one of Red Cross messages, as in most of our disaster work, is prevention. What can we do to prevent and mitigate the effects of excessive heat? And I'm sure you as the audience can think of some and share with us, but I'll just give you a few. Some of the things we can do are increasing, as Elmo said, our water intake, adapting lifestyle changes. Now, we are accustomed in our work to just go about our daily business from 8 a.m. to 5 o'clock, and we work consistently. Now, there are some persons who are more prone. Those of us who work on the indoors, it may be easier, but there will become the need, as have been happening in other cultures that are experiencing extreme heat, other cities and other places, for lifestyle and workplace occupational health adjustments to deal with the heat. Interestingly, Pakistan, India, some of the hottest places in the world, yeah? And just like us who are in the tropics, they face heat. However, thousands of persons have died due to excessive heat. And so we need to take the necessary precautions. In 2003, 18,000 persons died in France due to excessive heat. And France is a place that gets warm during summer. But they had over 18,000 deaths due to heat. So the preparedness is very, very important, and making those changes are key. So persons who work on the outdoors, like our construction workers, persons who have to lift and carry objects back and forth, sports personnel, etc., it's important to recognize that some of the habits and practices that we have that are normal may need to be adjusted. So doing the work in the early hours of the morning and the more strenuous activities in the later hours of the evening. Even for our sporting activities, we're big on sports, our school sports, etc. That may be something that we may need to look at. During our interprimary and in different high schools and primary school sports this year, we saw increasing number of children coming to for first aid assistance, and we did recognize fatigue, some dizziness, and exhaustion, and it wasn't just due because the children were tired. We also recognize that some of these signs and symptoms were likely due to the increased heat. So we may need to look at moving our sports into the evening sessions or afternoon versus at the peak, 11 and 12 o'clock, So these are things that the stakeholders and our partners and the education department decision makers would need to look at as we look at ways to mitigate and prepare for the changes that the excessive heat is bringing. Okay. So again, the key in staying safe is first being prepared and preventing the impact of excessive heat. So that would be the most important thing. So that will include things such as staying indoors during the hottest parts of the day, converting or redirecting our heaviest part of our work during the cooler parts of the day. Things like wearing loose clothing, wearing light clothing, leaving the darker colors for later in the evening, and adapting to our actual climate. So sometimes our jobs may require us, or events, etc., because of the norm or the requirement that we wear jackets, for example, and ties and stockings, etc. While those have their place, when it is excessively warm or it's very warm, if necessary, apologize if you have to, versus putting the body through the stress of being in the heat, in the norm, which can impact your health. So once you're going to be in the heat, lighter clothing, looser clothing, lighter colors as well. Then drinking water and fluids. And water is really important. So when we say fluids, it's very important to mention that fluids should primarily be, for excessive heat purposes, be water. And for persons who sweat a lot, salt is really important. If your work causes you to sweat a lot, we lose not just fluid when we sweat, we lose something called electrolytes, which is really important for the natural hemostasis of the body. It's critical even for our proper heart function, our muscles, etc. So those cramps that we get sometimes at night, Charlie horse as we call them, pull-ups sometimes, those are usually due to dehydration, lack of fluid, not having enough fluid on board. So those are some of the things that we can do. Step 2 is be aware of your community, the persons in your community who may be more vulnerable. You yourself, persons you're coming into contact with, so our children, especially infants, they depend on us, the adults, just like the animals, to take care of them and to recognize fluid imbalances and heat exhaustion, etc. And so children cannot take care of themselves, especially children under 5. They depend on us, the adults. So, and infants especially, they lose body heat very, very quickly. They are unable to regulate their body temperature as easily as we as adults would. So again, keeping them cool, giving them frequent amounts of water, etc. The elderly, persons over 65, so that's another thing we can do to help in that area, is recognizing our neighbors, especially our seniors who live alone. They live alone in their homes, or maybe 2 elderly persons, it may be 1, a neighbor, etc. When you notice the place is very hot, please go and check on your neighbor. You can even reach out to Red Cross to assist if you know there's someone who lives in a neighborhood alone and they're in the house a lot alone. There's social services. We have a very good social services system in Nevis, St. Kitts Nevis. And volunteers, we can activate our volunteers to assist in this area if necessary. So those are some of the ways that we can individually and as a community support our response to the increasing heat that is occurring and that will continue to occur.
Heat kills by pushing the human body beyond its limits. In extreme heat and high humidity, which is when the air has moisture and feels sticky, the body must work extra hard to maintain a normal temperature and keep the body comfortable. A heat wave is an extended period of extreme heat, and there is often high humidity. First of all, build an emergency kit. Secondly, make a family communication plan. And thirdly, keep shades closed on windows that are exposed to the morning and afternoon sun.
It's hot.
and good day to all who's watching or viewing this program. My name is Randy Elliott, Director for Agriculture here on the island of Nevis. And the selected topic, excessive heat, and how excessive heat could actually affect agriculture. The effects are far more deep than one would expect, and where excessive heat can affect agriculture throughout the entire sector as it relates from soils, animals, crops, etc. And I'll just take some time and go through how it affects each one of the sectors within agriculture as it relates to crops and livestock. Here in Nevis, we could see in some areas, mostly on the southeast side of Nevis, where you have a lot of livestock taking place, you would observe a number of the animals always walking, always trying to find somewhere to shade. Because animals, something like humans, their body operates at an optimal temperature. And once we exceed that optimal temperature, then basic normal functions of these animals are hindered. And as a result, the animals try to find alternatives in terms of trying to get the body cool. One may look at it, they may try to find water. So for those persons who are not providing water on the farms or in close proximity for these animals, you'll see them walk further distance in search of water. And a farmer may question, hey, my animal is this age, why is it not putting on weight? And this is all a result of the animal going out, searching for water, trying to bring its body temperature down, or the animal spending more time under a tree cooling itself rather than eating. And that again plays a negative effect on the animal. One might also observe that during period of excessive heat, the birth rate of young animals may decrease, because again, heat actually affects the animal reproductively. It affects the animal as it relates to semen quality, affects the females as it relates to ability to hold the young ones, and also affect the body processes as it relates to extracting nutrients from feed that they consume. So these are things that one need to pay attention as a livestock farmer or as someone who probably have one or two animals. Is during the period of heat that you have to ensure that you're able to provide the animals with as much comfort as possible so they'll be able to perform their basic bodily functions. Crops, on the other hand, is a little more different, where a plant, a tomato tree, a watermelon tree, has to stay in the heat and cannot go anywhere. And there are a number of things that, as a crop farmer, one will have to pay close attention to as it relates to the variety that you're planting within the given time. Also, the way you manage your crop. And you would realize that sometimes one would hear, oh, give the crop a little more water, or give the crop water a little more frequent. Well, that is true. The whole objective of it is to ensure that the plants are kept cool, the roots are kept cool. But more so, what we realize in excessive heat, you have a number of persons that try to irrigate in the heat of the sun. Well, that can be encouraging in some cases. One need to note that the water is not being used during the excessive heat of the sun, but it's only to be used as a means of cooling. As it relates to crops, I would have seen, not just here, but I would have seen in other places where Farmer X might be accustomed to planting a particular variety of melon, a particular variety of tomatoes, and they may plant a variety October, November, December. And yes, you get very good yields. And when you look at planting the said varieties in months like April, May, June into August, you realize you're not getting anything. And it's basically the plants itself are not able to reproduce during excessive heat. The heat affects the pollen, it affects fertility of the plants, and as a result, a farmer might be waiting, the crop looking all green and flourishing, but it still doesn't receive any fruit. So the negative impact of excessive heat on agriculture is actually excessive. So one would have to be cautious in terms of what is it you're planting during this time, the management practices that you intend to do, and so forth. Because it also affects the food security of an island, livelihood of a producer, where one may be forecasting maybe 10 pounds, and during the time of excessive heat, you probably may just get a half a pound. So these are things that one will have to be very cautious of. As a tip, as it relates to agriculture, with crops, one could practice back to basics as it relates to simple grass mulching, or whether it's the ground matting, all in the assistance of trying to keep plants cool. One could actually practice intercropping also, where there's a standing crop next to a running crop, where some shade could be provided. But for assistance, the department and the Ministry of Agriculture here in Nevis, we are very equipped in terms of technical support in assisting persons as it relates to how to mitigate the negative effects of excessive heat. We'd have seen here in Nevis that we had difficulties as it relates to even land preparation, where one will see the soil cracking, one realized the machinery having difficulties in terms of plowing the soils because of lack of moisture. The soil type of these clays, they're very tedious to work. So the whole concept, or the whole topic itself in terms of excessive heat and agriculture is one that you could speak of all day, or you probably speak of for months. And there's a saying that says, only who feels it knows it. But I'm very pleased to be here. I'm very happy that this topic was selected. I know during this period of COVID, we would have had first-hand experiences of the negative effects of excessive heat on the sector, where we have some farmers would have lost some crops as it relates to the heat. Some livestock officers had to go the extra mile to ensure that the animals survive during this period. So it's a well-selected topic. The department continue to work closely with the farmers as it relates to technical support and so forth, because it's all in the effort of ensuring that we're able to provide food security for the island and able to provide appropriate livelihoods for our farmers.
Good afternoon, panelists. Good afternoon to our viewing audience. I'm Brian Dyer, Director at the Nevis Disaster Management Department, and I'm here to speak to you about church disaster plans in relation to the hazard excessive heat. When the church knows in advance how it will protect church property and care for their people in the event of a disaster, they are better prepared to minister to their community. In relation to having a disaster plan ensures that the church establishes some order with regards to response and recovery teams. It establishes order, reduces anxiety and fear in the decision-making process, and improves coordination and decision-making. The scope of the disaster plan should consider the needs and size of the church population. Hazard assessment. Excessive heat affects the physiological responses from our church members. Around the Caribbean, you've had several churches that have had to improve their air conditioning as the airflow through the church is not convenient enough for the church members or the size of the population in the church. We have heard from the health presenter with regards to the impact of the excessive heat on the body. But from a disaster point of view, it is important that the church is prepared to minimize the impact of all hazards on the church population. It is important to have designed specific plans for the needs and requirements of a local church. Proper ventilation, the type of seating, the direction of seating to accommodate the airflow of the structure. Who should be involved in the preparation of the church facilities prior to the disaster? Everyone has an active role to play in the response and recovery process of disaster. So it is important for the congregation to identify responsible persons to lead specific groups to ensure that they have a coordinated effort in the response to the disaster. How existing resources in the church can be used during a disaster, whether prior to or after. Within our communities, there are many skilled persons, and it's important for the church to have a good relationship with our members in our communities. Skilled persons could be carpenters, masons, truck drivers, mechanics, and the like, to ensure that these resources can be brought together to ensure the speedy recovery of the church and have the building rectified or retrofitted as appropriate. Money goes a long way. However, the manpower that can be harnessed within our congregation and our communities and the skills would be great. Some skills require gender specific, such as the need to reach out to persons in the elderly or the elderly group, the children. We may have persons requiring psychosocial intervention through prayer or comfort. So in that regard, we may have to get gender-specific persons to deal with specific target. How the church will serve the community during and before disaster, it depends on the impact of the hazard and the scope of the operations. We may need feeding programs. We may need to introduce care at specific stages of the recovery process. So that should be considered with regards to developing a disaster plan. Establish a church profile. This church profile should include the size of the property, the characteristics of the church, whether it's made of wood, concrete, or a mixture of both. We look at the seating arrangement. Now we have the COVID environment. We would have to incorporate that within the seating arrangement within the churches. And also, again, the ventilation is important. Not only for safe passage of the air through the congregation, but the cooling impact with regards to excessive heat. Persons should ensure that they have a contact list for all persons within the congregation. That can be used for recovery process. The contact list can be used for notification and also for assigning persons to specific tasks. Resources in the community, I spoke to that earlier. There are many skills within our community that should be utilized or harnessed to assist with the recovery process. And also it's important for us to have simulation exercises, how we will be responding to specific scenarios, and that should be practiced by all. It should not be in a booklet sitting someplace. It should be practiced regularly and updated after each exercise or after each major impact. It is important to have assessment teams. The information collected during the assessment should be forwarded to the appropriate authorities, in this case, the disaster management entity. so we can have this information collated and placed into the overall report from the impact on the island or particular community. We should also establish priorities with regards to restoration. Some of our churches have more than one establishment, so it's important for the church, if the wherewithal is not available, to ensure that they prioritize the recovery process. Report writing and documentation is important for posterity and also for record keeping purposes, so we can assist the congregation in building back better. And updating emergency plan and procedures after all simulation exercises or impacts is important for the senior persons within the congregation to review the disaster plan and to update accordingly. Finally, psychosocial support and welfare of the congregation. It's important for our congregants to realize the impact of hazards on each individual. Some persons react differently to the stresses that may arise. So it's important for each individual to know their limits and their limitation and seek assistance where appropriate. The disaster management has ensured persons within our communities are trained in psychosocial support and they are available to administer their care. These persons are within the church fraternity and faith-based community, the Ministry of Education, and Social Services. They operate under one head or one umbrella under the Ministry of Health. So a myriad of persons and assistance can be had through the Ministry of Health, the faith-based organizations, the Ministry of Education, and Social Services. Don't be afraid to reach out for assistance and support.
Hi, my name is Trace McClain. I'm a registered nurse at the State Office of Risk Management in Austin, Texas. Did you know that some forms of rashes, cramping, exhaustion, and stroke are considered heat-related illnesses? Well, they are, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about each. The first one is heat rash. Heat rash is pretty common during hot and humid weather. It may appear as red, prickly, itchy bumps that come across the face, your chest, and up and down your arms. The best way to deal with that is to get to a cool spot, relax, and have a little bit of water. The second heat-related illness is heat cramps. Heat cramps causes cramping in the abdomen, in your arms and calves. This is due to a loss of salt and water while working or playing outside in the sun. When this happens, your body is telling you, it's time to rehydrate, I'm thirsty. So just start drinking water. Bottled water, tap water, water from the cooler, or grab a sports drink, which actually helps to replenish the lost electrolytes. Try to stay away from coffee, soda, energy drinks, and alcohol. They may feel good going down, but will dehydrate you more because, you guessed it, they're diuretics. The next heat-related illness is heat exhaustion, and that's exactly what it is. You are exhausted. You've overdone it. So now the body is producing a lot more sweat. You may show signs of weakness, nausea, vomiting, headaches, lightheadedness, and muscle cramps. The best way to handle heat exhaustion is to stop all activities, move to a cooler place, and slowly begin to rehydrate with water or a sports drink. The final heat-related illness is heat stroke. This is the big one, a real medical emergency. Heat stroke is caused when the body's cooling mechanism fails to produce sweat and the inside of the body or core begins to overheat. It's kind of like an oven. Your insides are cooking. When this happens, the body's temperature may reach upwards to 104 or 105 degrees. There may be a change in your behavior. You might feel a little bit confused, a little bit out of sorts, and also there's a decrease in sweating or no sweating at all. Other symptoms to look out for are flushing of the skin, rapid breathing, light panting, a racing heartbeat, and the worst headache imaginable. This heat illness is life-threatening. Call 911 if any of these symptoms are noticed. And if by chance you come across someone who's fainted or collapsed, immediately call 911. Do not give fluids. Stay close and keep an eye on them until medical help arrives. Several things can lead to a person fainting, so it's very important that you wait for first responders to arrive before attempting any type of medical treatment. Let's do a quick recap. If you're in the Texas heat and begin to feel like something is wrong, stop your activity, find a cool place, sit down and rest. Begin rehydrating your body with water or a sports drink. Stay away from drinks filled with caffeine or alcohol. They might quench your thirst, but will just make you more dehydrated. And last but certainly not least, if you feel sick, overheated, and you're not sweating, have a buddy call 911. Safety first. Following these simple tips will keep you healthy and safe while working or playing in that Texas heat. And remember, you heard it from a nurse first.
You know, it is vital to understand a hazard, because how do you handle what destroys you when you don't even know what it is? Much of the times we assume we know, but by the time experts start touching it, then you are like, wow, I didn't know it was that serious. So the best way for safety is to eradicate ignorance from what can destroy you. At this point, I want to encourage us, the audience, to ask one or two questions. But before they do, can you state to us clearly, so the common man can understand, procedures as to what to do during the excessive heat moment in order to stay safe?
Okay, so again, the key in staying safe is first being prepared and preventing the impact of excessive heat. So that would be the most important thing. So that will include things such as staying indoors during the hottest parts of the day, converting or redirecting our heaviest part of our work during the cooler parts of the day. Things like wearing loose clothing, wearing light clothing, leaving the darker colors for later in the evening, and adapting to our actual climate. So sometimes our jobs may require us, or events, etc., because of the norm or the requirement that we wear jackets, for example, and ties, and stockings, etc. While those have their place, when it is excessively warm or it's very warm, if necessary, apologize if you have to, versus putting the body through the stress of being in the heat, in the norm, which can impact your health. So once you're going to be in the heat, lighter clothing, looser clothing, lighter colors as well. Then drinking water and fluids, and water is really important. So when we say fluids, it's very important to mention that fluids should primarily be, for excessive heat purposes, be water. And for persons who sweat a lot, salt is really important. If your work causes you to sweat a lot, we lose not just fluid when we sweat, we lose something called electrolytes, which is really important for the natural hemostasis of the body. It's critical even for our proper heart function, our muscles, etc. So those cramps that we get sometimes at night, Charlie horse as we call them, pull-ups sometimes, those are usually due to dehydration, lack of fluid, not having enough fluid on board. So those are some of the things that we can do. Step 2 is be aware of your community, the persons in your community who may be more vulnerable. You yourself, persons you're coming into contact with, so our children, especially infants, they depend on us, the adults, just like the animals, to take care of them and to recognize fluid imbalances and heat exhaustion, etc. And so children cannot take care of themselves, especially children under 5. They depend on us, the adults. So, and infants especially, they lose body heat very, very quickly. They are unable to regulate their body temperature as easily as we as adults would. So again, keeping them cool, giving them frequent amounts of water, etc. The elderly, persons over 65, so that's another thing we can do to help in that area, is recognizing our neighbors, especially our seniors who live alone. They live alone in their homes, or maybe two elderly persons, it may be one, a neighbor, etc. When you notice the place is very hot, please go and check on your neighbor. You can even reach out to Red Cross to assist if you know there's someone who lives in a neighborhood alone and they're in the house a lot alone. There's social services. We have a very good social services system in Nevis, St. Kitts Nevis. And volunteers, we can activate our volunteers to assist in this area if necessary. So those are some of the ways that we can individually and as a community support our response to the increasing heat that is occurring and that will continue to occur.
Just to add 2 points, Roxanne would have indicated most of what I would have had here jotted out. Also, from a personal point of view, especially persons who are going to be working outdoor, you have to now consider using sunscreen lotion. And persons may take it for granted. Oh, black persons, why would you need sunscreen lotion? And Roxanne can attest, even as black as you may be, you can still get skin cancer. And that is caused from excessive heat. So you have to be careful with that as well. One other thing that you can do personally is utilize air conditioning or some kind of cooling mechanism, whether it be fan. We recognize that there will be a cost attached. But if you don't do it, you may eventually spend more because you may lose your life or the life of a loved one. So sometimes you may have to eventually utilize your aircon unit, especially during peak times of the day. And we recognize once ago, based on climatology, the peak time in terms of the hottest part of the day used to be from 11 to 2 o'clock. However, we have seen a major shift. And I can tell you, even from this year, I've recognized that the temperatures have been excessively warm from about 9 in the morning right up to 4 p.m. So it's almost the entire work day you're finding is excessively warm. So we as a community, we as individuals, we have to find some way. How can we cope with this thing? Recognizing that it's almost the entire day. At the same time, remember we would have indicated the nights are warmer than normal. Roxanne didn't mention it, but I'm going to mention your body rebuilds itself when it's supposed to be resting at night. And whenever you're under heat stress, in terms of you're uncomfortable, your body being excessively warm at nights, you would not recover and you would not recoup in a timely manner. And persons would recognize that if you fall sick for whatever reason and you're going to remain in a hot environment, it's going to take a longer time for you to recover. So that's something that you have to bear in mind as well.
This question goes to Mr. Randy Elliott, the Director of Agriculture Department in Nevis. In regards to greenhouse technology, how involved is the Agriculture Department in this paradigm? And also, what is its significance when considering excessive heat?
Currently, the department, we continue to work with all our farmers. As mentioned before, one goes back to basics as it relates to managing the crops of the mulch. But more so, as we are propelling the sector forward, the department, we're very supportive of greenhouse technology. And as it relates to designs of greenhouses here on the island of Nevis, I must make it be known that the greenhouse investors here on the island, they're very proactive and they've been working very closely with the department. We have a cadre of very young greenhouse investors. You're looking at ages between 26 and 35 as it relates to greenhouse investors. And this is another way that the department is encouraging persons, not just to improve the sector, but also as mitigation measures for climate change and excessive heat during this time. And we are seeing the benefits of it. As I said, like from selection of material, from positioning of the greenhouses, from the designs based on altitude of the greenhouses. The department, we are very proud of ourselves. We're very proud of our young investors in the sector, and we could only improve as a nation, as an island. If we wish to feed ourselves, we have to be willing to go the extra mile. We have to be willing to adapt. We have to be willing to mitigate, or we'll be lost. So we have to ensure that while nature is propelling forward, although some of the effects are negative to us, we have to continue to develop creative ways of how we can mitigate and how we'll be able to survive.
I want to first of all congratulate the Nevis Disaster Management for this initiative. I believe it is something that we need to see more of, because the issues that are being expounded are real. They are real issues. I just want to speak to a number of areas that were mentioned. The nurse mentioned about the type of clothing, and I believe that we no longer in the Caribbean produce cotton, or we no longer produce that kind of natural material for clothing. We have a lot of manufactured and synthetic materials that is now being used in the clothing sector. And while we would want to see the lighter colors during the hot months or the summer months, I think that the kind of material is very important, because we can have on a white, nice shirt, but based on the material, it is generating more heat than anything else on the body. So the material is very critical, and I think that cotton materials or clothing made from cotton is very important. I personally feel that the solution is right within us and right amongst us. We have had enough evidence, we have had enough science, we have had enough raw data to see the changes in our environment over the last 20 years, over the last 35 years, over the last 50 years. And those are realities, those are things that we have to contend with. But I think that all in all, I think that this is a healthy discussion. It covers area that I believe that goes to our very existence, our environment. And if we can get a few of these things right, I believe we'll be fine. Thank you.
Good evening. This is not a question, it's a comment. I would like to say that the discussion tonight is very interesting and very informative for me. I would like to say also that man is his own worst enemy, isn't he? Because we are having these discussions today because of the problems that we are encountering in the environment. However, we got here by our own doing, and I don't think that because of the lifestyle changes that we have now compared to 40 years ago, I don't think there's anyone who wants to go back to where we were 40 years ago. And because of the many different gadgets that we have, I'm not an expert, but my understanding is that these gadgets affect the environment because of the amount of waste that come as a result. And they also affect the ozone layer, which affects the environment and the heat that we're experiencing today. I think as a society we could help ourselves a little bit, and if everybody does a little bit, it would go a long way. Also concerning construction workers and those who work in the hot sun In some countries, I know in years past, in Spain and the Spanish countries, they have a siesta time between 12 o'clock and, well, I'm not sure the time, but say maybe between 12 and 2 or 2 and 4, something like that. They have a siesta time, and the whole place closes down. Everybody goes home and take a rest, and they come back out in the evening when it is cooler. I don't know if that would be adaptable here. I know in divisions, once they go home, they're not coming back. So, you know, those are some things that we could think about. But, you know, the whole situation would seem depressing, but for one thing, that our hope is not only in this world, but we have a hope in the world to come. And all of this is part of what is going to happen in the end time. When you say, well, the waters are getting warmer, and we're not going to have enough fish and all of that, sounds pretty depressing to me. But for the fact that if only in this life we have hope, we have all been most miserable. And we have a better hope, a better future. And for those who are just thinking of this earth, just think it's not going to last forever. Make your calling election sure for the world to come. Thank you.
Could it be that this global warming is God's warning?
Some of the words that have really underscored this entire thing here tonight are words like coping, mitigating, and I would have to agree with my mom. As I listened, I observe a sense of inevitability as it relates to this earth in which we live. The fact that it's as if we are going down a particular slope, it's slippery, and we are doing all we can to be able to hold back or to restrain something that ultimately will take place. I haven't heard any scientists or any experts actually say that this whole trend is going to turn around. I haven't heard anybody present a solution that says we are going to stop the excessive heat from getting hotter. I haven't heard any individuals say that we're going to prevent the hurricanes from getting worse. I haven't heard anybody say that we're going to prevent the sea levels from getting higher. So ultimately, it tells me that we are heading towards the end. I think the reality is there. We are just trying to, as they say, hold strain and prevent it, as if we could hold it back from ultimately happening. But the signs are there, and the Bible also clearly tells us that in the latter days that these things will ultimately happen. And so I would just simply say that, you know, we have to recognize that we've been given this earth, and our bodies itself are temporal. This earth also is temporal. I mean, you see people today, we speak about health, and we do all the things. We exercise, we want to eat right, we want to do all these things. Why? Because we want to live as long as possible. But at the end of the day, the reality is, no matter how much you eat, no matter how nutritious your meals are, no matter how much you exercise and all these things, ultimately, you will face death. You will face the demise of your earthly human body. I think the reality is that this earth is on a similar track and a similar trend, and the onus for us and the thing for us to recognize is that all that we see and all that we are is temporal. And as the Bible says in Matthew chapter 6, it says, lay not up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moth and rust doth not corrupt, and thieves do not break through and steal. And so I think we ought to do all we can, and I commend the efforts of all those involved and all of us to be able to preserve what we have, but ultimately recognize that nothing on this earth will last forever, and we ought to prepare and invest our lives in the eternal.
I would just like to wrap up and say, the pastor would have indicated it quite well earlier. Most of what we can do is cope with this excessive heat. There is very, very little that we can do to mitigate, we as a small nation, we as an individual, especially here in small island states, to mitigate against this excessive heat. Science have shown we have almost passed the point of no return, where the earth is going to just keep on getting warmer and warmer. So all we have to do is, how can we cope? If we want to exist on this earth, we have to find some way to cope with the excessive heat. And that's the stage that we are at now, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. So I would like to end with that.
I think we all realize that even if we came here not thinking so much about heat, because we're accustomed to a very hot environment and we're in the tropics and it's heat, we are now living with a better awareness that it does have great impact, not just on our health, but on our infrastructure, on our energy source, and our economic and socioeconomic impact. So the impacts are wide. And I'd just like to encourage us, our meteorologist has indicated that it's not going to get better. So at an individual level and at a community level, let us put the necessary measures in place to help us best adapt and cope with this excessive heat. And in the process, let's help those who are more vulnerable among us.
In fact, it's a pleasure having these great brains or great minds in our midst just to educate us. What I want us to summarize, if we look at the input, it would have been economical, sociological, and even biblical, which tells us disaster management starts from the spiritual angle. And that is why the first mitigation is accepting the Lord Jesus as your Lord and Savior, because the biggest disaster is a lake of fire. Then followed by natural aspect, which tells me why the church is the best place for mitigating process. Pastor Wayne would have brought out the reality of things. Says you can't stop it, it's going to happen. However, I don't want us to have the pessimistic view of like, why try anything when I know I can't stop it? That is not what he was trying to say. You know, there are some persons who say it will happen anyway. What I prepare, I don't prepare, it's going to happen. So let me just do whatever I can do. That is not it. It's better for certain things to occur at the appropriate time than for carelessness to make it get worse. Because Proverbs says the wise man sees danger and hides, but the foolish one just gets into it. So may we not be foolish. It's better to prepare and prevent than to repair and repent.
I do want to say kudos to the Nevis Disaster Management Department and their leadership in having this forum and this participation and collaboration with faith-based institutions and, of course, Charlotte Baptist Church, and our involvement in providing awareness on this issue of excessive heat. And I think it was quite a stimulating discussion and dealing with it from all angles. And of course, I love the fact that there was a biblical and spiritual aspect, and I think that surely is very relevant to where we are. And as Jack indicated, certainly not meaning to have a pessimistic viewpoint, but to have a sense of a reality of signs of the times and what those mean for us as individuals, as families, and as a nation and as a world. And so that we can prepare not only for being able to cope with the realities that we exist here on earth, but also prepare rather for the reality of life beyond the temporal and life eternal. And so I'm happy for the opportunity to be able to have partnered with Disaster Management Department and also as a church to be able to have an involvement in disseminating this information to the community. And I trust that we will certainly prepare not only for temporal, but prepare eternally and make sure that our calling and election is sure by placing our faith and trust in Jesus Christ, the one who came and gave his life for the remission of our sins. And certainly we can live this life in hope, knowing that this world is not the end, but we are passing through, and one of these days it will inevitably come to an end, but we can live for all eternity once we have a relationship with God.
Good afternoon, and it is my pleasure to be here with you this afternoon to speak on the topic of excessive heat. Let me thank the Nevis Disaster Management Department for extending the invitation to me, and in particular to Jack for the invitation. I'm very much honored to be able to speak here with you this afternoon. I am a Caribbean man by nature, so it's a very particularly distinct occasion for me to be able to address my fellow Caribbean people. You have heard from several speakers already about the matter of excessive heat. We have approached it from the agricultural perspective. You've heard from the Met Office. You've heard from the Disaster Management Office themselves. You've heard from the Red Cross. And it's my job to see how we can put a spin on all of this. And I want to look at this topic today and to take you down a road to say, we have sat and we've listened, we've participated, but what have we learned? And what are we going to do with what we have heard today? And how are we going to allow it to make a difference in our life? In my years in disaster management, one of the key things I've come across and what I've learned is that we can speak a lot to persons about various issues, but we make a difference when we make a change in their attitude, a change in their behavior. As was said by the Met Office, yes, indeed, excessive heat is something new. No, it isn't. But we're now coming to appreciate it more and more as we speak more and more about climate change. We have traded on excessive heat in the Caribbean as part of our tourism product. It's great for us. You come to the Caribbean, see sun and sand, and it's a major issue. But at the same time, the same sun that we appreciate and we sell can become an issue when the temperatures become too extreme. And so we have learned there are many things that we can do. And so as we look to wrap up this afternoon, I want to bring us to a point where we are able to say, what is it that we can do? We have seen excessive heat can be very detrimental to us physically as humans. It can be detrimental to our economy, to our agriculture, to various aspects of our lives. So knowing that, what difference are we going to make going forward after this presentation, after this virtual discussion? Are we going to just take the information and move on? Or are we going to take the information and seek to make a difference going forward? One of the key elements of living in the Caribbean is that we are a multi-hazardous society. Can you imagine us speaking about excessive heat in the middle of the hurricane season, and we've just said goodbye to Tropical Storm Gonzalo? So therefore, we have to have an appreciation that we are exposed to several different hazards, and with the impact of climate change, excessive heat is now becoming more and more of a threat to our lives. So therefore, what can we do? It's all about us being proactive, and let us look at what we can do. Because to me, I want you to go away this afternoon, not only having heard and learned, but going forward to be able to do something to make a change, to make a difference. Now, we have learned many definitions today. We have learned what excessive heat is. We've learned all aspects. And so we have increased our awareness. So the first step that we have to do is to continue our education, continue learning about excessive heat, and to see how it affects us here, not only in Nevis, not only in St. Kitts and Nevis, but also in the Caribbean, and how we can help to deal with it. So we need to continue our education. Secondly, once we have learned more, what do we do with this information? we now need to translate this information into action, into plans, into mitigation measures to reduce the impact of heat going forward. So therefore, let us sit back, let us sit down, let us look about creating our family disaster plan, which would include heat, dealing with excessive. We have to be active, we have to be focused, and I want us to go away and to look at the information and to take steps to create these plans. Why is it important for us to do this? It is important, my brothers and sisters, because we have to plan for the future. We have to plan for any eventuality. We face hurricanes, we face floods, we face landslides, we face fires, we face a lot of hazards. And we do drills, we do earthquake drills, we do fire drills. In the same way, we have to take this threat about excessive heat very seriously and make our plans to deal with it. So it's very important for us to now sit down, take the time, and to make our plans going forward. As the piece says, as we reflect, reflection without action yields nothing. And as I said earlier, coming out of today's presentation, opportunity that we have been offered, it is time for us to take action. And so, as we look forward to the rest of the summer, we know that we're going to have additional elements, additional potential heat waves and other issues to deal with. And I want us to be prepared. I want us to be positive. I want us to be confident that whatever challenges come to us, not only with regards to excessive heat, not only to natural hazards, but to our life going ahead, that once we are properly educated, once we are willing to listen and to take action, and once we have our plans in place and we practice our plans, we are going to be a better off society. We're going to be a safer and more secure society. So as I close off today, let me once again take thanks for the opportunity to speaking with you. And I sincerely hope that what you have heard today from all the speakers, you will have learned something, you have gotten a greater appreciation of not only excessive heat, but about being prepared. I would like to say a special thanks to the Disaster Management Office again for creating these opportunities to educate us as a people of the Caribbean. And that is very, very important. Even with COVID, our good brother Jack created a virtual session for us to speak. And that's very, very important. Because what we have done right away is we have taken the difficulty and created a unique opportunity. So this is a unique opportunity you should grasp. So brothers and sisters, take care, go forward. We are going to be positive, we are going to plan, and we are going to implement. Because as a people of the region, we are resilient and we are able to manage anything that comes our way. So do have a good afternoon and take care. And I hope we will get another opportunity to speak again.